Claude Lemieux didn't become the most hated player in hockey because of one hit. But one hit is what made everything stop.
But all we needed, could all been put away, if he would have said, he's sorry.
It started in 1986, the Stanley Cup Final. A bench-clearing brawl breaks out between Montreal and Calgary. In the middle of the chaos, Lemieux bit Flames forward Jim Poplinski's finger, drawing blood on the ice. It was on national TV. Poplinski later said he didn't even know you were allowed to do that in the NHL. By 1989, his coach Pat Burns had finally reached his limit. Lemieux was known for driving to draw penalties, and during one game, Burns told the trainers not to help him. He left him lying on the ice in front of the fans and both benches. It was a public message. Burns didn't care about the talent at that moment. He was tired of the act. He wanted a hockey player, not a performer. In March 1995, while playing for the New Jersey Devils, Lemieux added another disciplinary incident to his record. He punched Brett Lindros from the bench while play was ongoing. The league gave him 3 games. That same year, he scored 13 playoff goals and won the Conn Smythe. New Jersey swept the Detroit Red Wings in the Stanley Cup Final, eliminating a heavily favored Detroit team. Detroit fans didn't need a reason to hate him, but the 95 sweep gave them one anyway. To the Red Wings, he was the face of a crushing defeat. The resentment started long before they ever met in a Colorado jersey. Most enforcers hit you hit them back, and it was over. Lemieux was different. He was a high-skilled agitator. He'd score a clutch goal, then spend the next 3 shifts trying to draw a penalty by diving or chirping a guy's family. In the mid-90s, the NHL was trying to move away from the Broad Street Bullies era, but Lemieux was a throwback to a style of play that felt dishonest to other players. He wasn't just physical. He was annoying. He was the guy you wanted to punch because he was constantly trying to trick the officials. By the time he got to Colorado, he was a psychological weapon. Shortly after that championship run, the Devils traded Lemieux to the Colorado Avalanche. He was placed on a line with Peter Forsberg and Valeri Kaminsky and quickly became one of the Avalanche's most productive forwards. He was viewed as a winger who consistently tested limits, took penalties, and forced officials into difficult decisions every single night. The foundation of the Detroit-Colorado War was laid 6 days before Kris Draper was ever touched. You have to look at the ice in Denver on May 23rd. Game 3. In the first period, Vyacheslav Kozlov caught Adam Foote in a vulnerable position. He didn't just finish his check, he drove Foote into the glass, opening a deep cut. The Avalanche bench wasn't just angry. They were watching the replay on the scoreboard. They saw the way Foote's head snapped back. They saw the blood on the glass. When the refs didn't call the Kozlov hit, the energy shifted from winning a game to surviving a fight. And Lemieux felt he had to respond or the Red Wings would have walked all over them for the rest of the series. Mark Crawford was losing his mind on the bench. He wasn't just yelling at the officials. He was reacting to the fact that his best defenseman was in the room getting his face stitched up while Kozlov was still taking shifts. By the second intermission, Colorado's focus had shifted away from systems and toward what they felt had just been allowed. Later in the same game, Claude Lemieux responded. During a stoppage play, Lemieux skated toward Kozlov and delivered a punch away from the puck. Officials immediately intervened, and the incident was reviewed by the league. The NHL suspended Lemieux for Game 4 of the series, citing the retaliatory nature of the punch rather than the original hit that preceded it. When Lemieux returned to the lineup for Game 6, the series had reached its most volatile stage. Colorado held a 3-2 lead, and Detroit was facing elimination. The series had already featured escalating physical play and repeated confrontations after whistles. Midway through the first period, Kris Draper carried the puck, turning his back to the play as he tried to move it along the boards. Claude Lemieux drove Draper face first into the boards near the Detroit bench. The contact sent Draper's head and upper body hard into the dasher, leaving him crumpled on the ice immediately after the impact. Officials assessed Lemieux a 5-minute major penalty for boarding and a game misconduct, ejecting him from the game. Draper was helped off the ice and did not return. Medical evaluation later confirmed the severity. Draper suffered a broken jaw, a broken nose, and a fractured cheekbone, as well as a concussion. The facial damage required reconstructive surgery, and his jaw was wired shut for weeks during recovery. If you've never seen the photos of Draper in a hospital, they don't look like a hockey injury. he needed dozens of stitches in his face. His jaw was shattered. While the Avalanche were celebrating their cup run, Draper was sitting in a dark room in Detroit, unable to speak, wondering if his career was over. Draper would later describe the moment simply: "I remember hitting the boards, and then nothing after that." Even after Lemieux was sent to the showers, the atmosphere didn't calm down. The Red Wings were shell-shocked. They weren't looking at the scoreboard. They were looking at the spot along the boards near the Detroit bench where Draper went down. The Avalanche didn't back off. They played a heavy, suffocating game that made Detroit's skilled players look human. By the time the final horn sounded, Colorado was celebrating a trip to the finals, but the handshake line felt like a funeral. Dino Ciccarelli said later he was embarrassed that he even touched Lemieux's hand. Ciccarelli didn't realize the extent of the damage until the post-game report reached the locker room. The news turned the mood from disappointment to pure hatred. For Detroit, this wasn't playoff physicality anymore. It was an assault. Brian Burke was the one who had to deliver the news. The league office knew they couldn't just give him a fine, not with Draper's jaw in pieces. They sat him out for the first 2 games against the Florida Panthers. It was the first time under modern NHL disciplinary rules that a player was suspended for games within a Stanley Cup final for an on-ice infraction, marking Lemieux's second disciplinary hearing of the 1996 postseason. Colorado closed out the series quickly, ending the season with Lemieux back in uniform and the rivalry unresolved. What did not occur during this period was equally important. Lemieux did not issue a public apology to Draper, and no reconciliation followed in the immediate aftermath.
You know, how I feel about Lemieux, honestly, like, I don't know him, you know, and we never talked about that. So
Draper's recovery took months, and the physical scars remained visible long after he returned to the lineup. The league thought the 2 games settled the matter. Detroit knew better. Detroit spent the whole summer staring at the calendar. During the first 3 meetings of the 1996-97 season, officials assessed an average of 42 penalty minutes per game. McCarty and Lemieux would cross paths, and the refs would move in before a word was even spoken. By the time the teams met again on March 26, 1997 at Joe Louis Arena, the atmosphere had completely changed. Detroit fans arrived knowing exactly who was coming to town. That morning, the Detroit News published a mock wanted poster of Claude Lemieux on its front page, complete with a prison number and the headline, "A Time for Revenge." Early in the game, fights broke out between players who were not central to the original incident. Late in the first period, a scrum between Igor Larionov and Peter Forsberg triggered the release points. McCarty didn't wait for a whistle. He found Lemieux and dropped him with a right hand. Lemieux didn't fight back. He just curled up into a ball while McCarty kept swinging, dragging him toward the Detroit bench so his teammates could see it up close. He wanted Lemieux to feel the collective weight of what he'd done the year before.
That face pops up in front of you and you don't miss a beat. You pull back and hit it with everything that you got.
When Patrick Waugh left his crease, the night crossed a line. Goalie fights are rare, but when Waugh and Mike Vernon squared off at center ice as both benches emptied, it stopped being about one hit or one game. It became about which team owned the league. When the night ended, the game had produced a pile of fights and well over 100 penalty minutes, and McCarty was still in the game and later scored the overtime winning goal in a 6-5 Detroit victory. In the building, the response was obvious. Fans roared as Lemieux left the ice bloodied and shaken, and McCarty was embraced as the player who had answered what the league had not. Despite the hatred, Lemieux kept winning. People who didn't even follow the Red Wings were tuning in to see if someone would get killed on the ice. In Colorado, Lemieux was a hero. They saw a guy who did the dirty work to win a championship. In Detroit, he was a monster. Did the NHL create Claude Lemieux, or did it need him? The league markets the rivalry he helped create. Coaches kept deploying him in big moments because he delivers. He finished with 1,215 games played and 80 career playoff goals. He has the rings, but in the 313 area code, he has a different title. He's the man who made a generation of fans realize that hockey could be as much about survival as it was about scoring. Hockey rewarded him for the very behavior that made him a pariah. Every time he hoisted a trophy, it reinforced the idea that in the NHL, the results justify the methods. He knew exactly what the league would tolerate, and he lived right on that edge for 2 decades. The rivalry didn't stay on the ice. It moved into the culture of both sides. You couldn't walk into a bar in Detroit without hearing Lemieux's name spoken like a curse word. The incident created a permanent cultural divide between the two fan bases. Even when the players changed and the jerseys were retired, the footage of that March night in 1997 became the most watched brawl in the history of the sport. Lemieux retires with rings, goals, and a reputation that never softened. He's still booed years later in arenas across the country. He is still blamed by some for changing hockey for the worse, for ushering in an era where the line between physicality and intent to injure became dangerously blurred. Years later, polls and retrospectives consistently ranked Claude Lemieux among the most hated players in NHL history, and Detroit fans placed him at the top. At a 2016 Colorado alumni game held in Denver, Lemieux and Draper were photographed exchanging a handshake. A moment that drew attention because they had never publicly reconciled over the hit that defined their rivalry. The history, however, is permanent. Claude Lemieux, four-time champion and the architect of hockey's most violent grudge. Was Claude Lemieux a necessary villain, or did he prove the NHL rewarded the wrong behavior for too long? One hit made him hated forever, but hockey never stopped benefiting from it. If you want hockey stories that don't scrub away the ugly parts, hit subscribe right now. This channel is for the stuff they don't put in the official montages. This is for the moments that changed the sport, not the sanitized versions they show on TV. And if you want to back this work directly, the join button is waiting below. No fluff, no promises, no drama. This is how these deep dives keep coming.